Afternoon to everyone. I'm Hardika Gupta. I'm Rotractor Hardika Gupta, the Entrepreneurship Development Director of Rotract Club of Bombay Queenstown. And today we have a workshop on the different financial stages a startup goes through. So, first of all, I would like Mr. Davinder sir to give a brief introduction about himself.
All right, good afternoon, everybody who has joined here. Thank you, Hardikya, for inviting me to this talk. Uh, it's very heartening to see interest in entrepreneurship among such young people, among like yourself. So I am a CEO incubation at BML Munjaj University. At the university, we have a very active incubation system. One of them being Propel, another being Airtel Community Innovation Center, which has been set up along with Niti Aayog. So apart from looking after incubation, I also teach courses in the area of entrepreneurship. Uh, I come from an industry background. For close to about 3 decades, I was working industry with companies like National Dairy Development Board, Jagajit Industries, Gavin Care, and Coca-Cola. So during this period, while I was at the industry, I've been involved in many initiatives which required launch of a new product or a new service. Uh, and interestingly, not all of them succeeded. In fact, more of them failed than succeed. Okay, which of course over a period of time we realize that is nothing unusual. So while when things did not succeed, I learned a lot from them, and whenever there was a success, it brought in a lot of value. Brought in a lot of value to the company when they had a commercial success. So over my period of work at industry, I've made a firm belief that innovation is an integral part of business success. So without innovation, the big businesses cannot survive. It's not about matter of success; it's also for survival. So if you look at groups like Tatas or Birlas or many old ones, they are very old groups, and they have survived not because of anything else, but every time there was an opportunity, they had been innovating and they had been modifying and adapting themselves. We also know there were a lot of strong family businesses which were not able to innovate or adapt and hence could not survive. Now that's something which I gained at a very close quarter because I worked with companies like Jagajit Industries. Now, this company was a pioneer in alcohol beverages. It was a pioneer in snack food. It was a pioneer also in the malt food. But when the time required, they did some innovation, but not very consistently. Hence, they had a challenging times, and eventually, the different parts of their businesses were kind of acquired by other companies. On the other side, when you look at companies like AB Birla Group or even Reliance or Tata Group, you would see how these groups have over a period of time modified and kind of embraced innovation. Now, of course, innovation is critical to it, to any business. So this is something which I learned there. More recently, since about 7 years ago, I moved into full-time academics with BML Munjaj University. This is a university which is in Gurgaon district, close to a city called Daruheda. The university has been set up by Hero Group. They are the largest two-wheeler manufacturer, both the motorcycle as well as the bicycle. Interestingly, both these two vehicles, the group holds the global #1 position. And over the last 7 years, the university establishment, development, growth, I've been fortunate enough to have been a part of this success story. So today, if I'm standing or sitting along with you, what I bring to you is my experience as an industry person launching a lot of new products, innovation, as a faculty who has been teaching entrepreneurship, and as an incubator, I bring the understanding of how to help startups. So these are some of the things that I would like to kind of share or bring to today's discussion. Thank you so much, Hardika, once again, and thank you all the Rotarians. Rotaracts. Are you calling yourself Rotaracts or Rotarians? I don't know. But thank you all of you for having me here.
Thank you so much, sir, for accepting the invitation. And without further ado, let's get to the topic for which we are here. So, my first question to you is: we all know that a startup goes through different financial stages. In the first stage, it does not have enough funds where the profits are not there. Then we have a break-even point, and then from that break-even point, the startup gets to earn money. So, can you explain how does a startup grow from level zero to a level where it's profitable enough and is able to run the business?
Right. Thank you so much. I think it's a very interesting topic that you have chosen. Financial stages of a startup. In fact, I would say start from remove the word financial in the beginning. Say what are the stages of a startup. I think then at each stage one can talk about the financial. Now, one thing that I would like to again say that what I have witnessed over the last decade is amazing in India. We no longer are now talking of innovation being driven by large companies, which was earlier the mainstay. Large companies, because of their dominance on the industry, but the amount of, not only that, but also the amount of financial strength they had, they were driving the innovation. But it's the last 10 years or more, around that time, 10 to 15 years, the innovation has been driven more by the smaller, upcoming, new organizations, which we term as startups. So they are the ones who have come up with it. Now, what really means, and we all know that many of these, not many, in fact, almost all of these organizations never had the kind of financial strength or muscle that large organizations had. Yet they were far more successful, and they were able to create a lot of value for the founders, value for the people who work for the organization, and value overall for the users and the society. Now, which really brings out is that why is that so, right? Which also means that while finance or funds are essential, those are not the big reason for them to be successful. So for a startup to be successful, the bigger thing is how do you go about, what idea do you pick up with, and how do you go about developing it and taking it to the market. That is the big thing. And of course, funds are required. So financial stages are important part of, or finance is an important part of all the stages that a startup goes through. So now let's look at how does typically a startup journey start. So let's say if we were to think of 2 or 3 people who have a common thought that they need to have a startup of their own, and they've come together and they form a startup. So initially what do they have? They have basically a desire to do something new, something which is different from what is happening currently, and in that process, create a venture, create a business which would deliver to the users, to the consumers, something of benefit to them, something big enough, and that these guys will get some money in return for that, and they will grow and then have a successful venture on their hands. So this is exactly typically how it would work. I mean, that is how the view or the vision would be. Now, when you start initially you just are people together and an idea and a certain conviction and a passion and some money. And where does this money come from? Money would come from, probably all of them would get together, some money they may have. If they have worked for some time and they've made some savings, they can pool that, or they can go to their friends and family, borrow some money, and that borrowing money is purely because somebody loves you enough or cares for you enough to give you some money, and then you put together and you start. Now, initially, of course, you would need money more to develop your idea. What is in mind needs to come into physical format, testing it, making some prototypes, those kind of things. And then you will go about testing it. And if the testing shows that yes, you are onto something which people are willing to buy, people are willing to open their wallets and pay you some money, then you would go what is known as from 0 to 1 first user, and from 1 to there onwards. So then you will get into a certain early stage revenues. Now, in between this, from an idea to the early stage revenue, you would keep needing funds, on a regular basis. And depending upon what kind of work you're doing, which industry you're in, that will determine the kind of money that you require. Some industries require a lot of money, some don't require too much of money, and that will continue on there. But once you're in the market and you start getting some response, which is positive, then what would happen is that you would start needing money quickly to start to scale up. So let's look at very simply, if you're working in one small district and you're going to cater to some 100 of consumers only, you need money only for that scale of operation. But once you want to increase the scale, you would need to have money, more money. So that money would largely go into growth. So while till you go into the market, the money is required for development. Once you're in the market, then the money is required for growth. And then once you grow to a stage, then you would require money to kind of continuously start to be able to handle the competition well. Because what is going to happen is initially you might say, I have a competition. But then you're the small guy. You're not really the one who has to worry so much about the competition. The competition really has to worry about you. But when you start to grow and you start to become a success, you will start seeing a lot more people will want to come into the same business. So, once Amazon or Flipkart became successful, we started seeing many other e-commerce platforms coming up. They still come up. Okay, when you see some D2C brands succeeding, many other D2C brands start to come. Okay, so what will happen is that after you gain a certain size, not only would you need money to grow, but you would need money to compete as well with the others, because your growth will be attracting others to come into the category, and then you will have to create that ability to fight up. And then once you become fairly big, then you no longer remain a startup, because you become quite institutionalized, like what Make My Trip is today. It no longer is a startup. It's a huge organization. It is probably in their own field, they're as big as, let's say, Levers is in their field or P&G is in their field. So there it becomes a more institutionalized thing. And then the money is required not just for the growth, because the growth is not going to be large, but also for running the business and being able to create a certain pool of money, which will be helpful when you hit downturns, like not that one would have planned, but you can enter something like what COVID has done to Make My Trip or many other businesses. So there are different stages. The way you would look at it is the initial stage, which is a pre-market stage for a startup, where the funding is required largely to develop your idea, continuously evolve it, and come to a stage where you can take it to the market. So it's that thing. Once you're in the market, then you need to start putting in money to grow, to develop your market. First is to develop your venture, your idea, then is to develop your venture and grow your market. And then is to be able to make yourself stronger to beat the competition. And then, of course, you need funds to cruise as a large business. So these are broadly the stages that you would, as a startup, face, and you would require funding. And the interesting thing is that these funding is, if say you are from a family business, if you have a family which has a fairly successful business and that they have a spare cash to give to you, you might not be so worried. But most startups don't have this kind of a platform to begin with. So, and the conventional sources of funds are not available. The conventional source being usually the bank or NBFC. Now, if not the bank, but NBFC, those are not available simply because startups come with a very high risk, because you are innovating. You are doing something which others haven't done. So there is no history to say, okay, this will succeed. In fact, the statistics say that more likely a startup will fail than it will succeed. Okay, and there is no formula to say, okay, now if you check these things, if you have these things, then you will be a success. Because if that formula was there, everybody who would start up would end up being a success. That is not there. So NBFCs and banks usually do not fund these kind of ventures, simply because they put money behind those businesses which are likely to succeed or which are already a success, and not only a success but are also having a predictable cash flows, because banks get their return by getting regular payments back as form of a combination of principal and interest, what is known as interest payments, or EMIs in some cases. And a startup never has a cash flow to show in any case, and the projected cash flows can be very, very different from what actuals are. So the traditional sources have not been there, and that is why it's not very easy to embark on it. You may collect some money from your own self and your friends and family. That's a limited money. Initially, it works, but if your venture requires large sum of funds, then that's not sufficient. The good thing is that that of late, or rather since about, I think, 20 mid 90s of last century, especially in US, this trend of risk money started to develop. So there were people, there were organizations which had a lot of cash which they wanted to invest, but they also wanted to also increase the return. The traditional source of investment wasn't given enough return, so they were looking at some high reward investments, and they therefore took on a certain part, a very small part, but sufficiently large for the startups, which they started to give to startups, with the intent that it will give, if it succeeds, it could give a lot of return. So the risk money or risk finance started around that time, a little bit before that, but it started to pick up. In India, it happened closer to post the Lehman Brothers. It became bigger. There was some before that also, but it really became bigger after the Lehman Brothers. So the last 10 years or so, the risk finance has started to increase. In fact, what has happened is that many of the industrialists in India, many of the family businesses who have funds, so at an individual capacity, they have turned into investors. So a lot of families at an individual capacity have turned into investors, and as part of their portfolio, they also invest in startups now. Okay. So which is an encouraging thing. And many of the entrepreneurs who have succeeded and have taken a profitable exit, they have also become investors, because they want to not just encourage new entrepreneurs, but more importantly, they realize that there is an ability of a startup to make a big difference, and investment in startup can give a lot of returns. So, and they have done that journey, so they can actually, when they invest, they can also work along with the startup for it to succeed. So there is a lot of risk finance now available, which allows a startup to not really be too worried about the risk finance, which was probably a challenge 10 years ago. So I will stop here now. And what I would like is, Hardik, apart from you, if anybody else wants to ask any question, we can do that. I want it to be more of a conversation where anybody can ask anything. And if I can answer, I will answer. If I cannot, I will at least be able to give a framework to you all to seek the answers. Yeah, Hardik, over to you.
Yeah. So, as you told that now it is difficult for startups to sustain themselves. So, can you give us some common methods which startups use to generate revenue until and unless they have not put their final product in the market, or they are still not ready with their final product? So, what kind of strategy do they use in that case?
Right. I think I also saw a message question from Ekansh, which is
Yeah.
relevant to what you just said. Why do startups fail? That's a very good question, Ekansh. And by failure, of course, the question is what do you call as a failure? There are various stages. But I would say if a startup does not exist uh, after 2 years of its launch, if it winds up within 2 years of its launch of product in the market, I would say that's, and they've closed down, that would say that's a failure. Okay, and if you notice, I'm not saying the word that they make profits. Okay, a lot of startups for a very, very long time do not make profit. Amazon and Flipkart till about few years ago were not making. Zomato is still not making profit, but you can't call Zomato a failure. Okay, so the definition of failure for me is when you stop your startup within 2 years of your launch of your product. I mean, you could do even before you launch. Now, the reason why many of the startups don't succeed is not so is really a combination of few things. First, see, as a startup, you're trying to solve a problem for a user which other has not been able to solve as well as you are trying to do. Now, it could be a problem which is a new one which nobody has solved so far, or it could be a problem for which a solution exists, but it's not as good as what some. So it is your way of looking at the problem, assuming the way you're looking is also the way the user are looking at it. Meaning, are you seeing the problem or are you seeing the opportunity the same way as the user is seeing? And many a times, a startup is not able to get this right. They think what they are thinking is what user is thinking. So that is where the problem, first area of likely failure can happen. Understanding the user. Understanding your perception or your way of perceiving and thinking that is how user does is a fallacy. So all the startups which have succeeded have made that effort, if not early, certainly pretty quickly, that they have to put themselves in the user's shoe. Okay? And then try to see what is user's problem and then try to solve from that perspective. That is the first. Second is that they may make this understanding, but they may not understand that how big is the opportunity. Okay, so they might have a very wrong impression that the opportunity may be very large. It may not be so. So that is the quantitative part of it. The first part is more qualitative, understanding the consumer. That is more qualitative. Second is quantitative. Then the third one is that the solution that you're providing, is it actually going to be of such a value that it will generate a revenue for you? That also is something that people miss out. So in a way, in a very broad sense, understanding, assuming that there is a demand for what you're going to take to the market, without checking that out, that is the single biggest reason why startups fail. Okay. Now, if you can understand the demand and you can match your offering to demand well, if not 100%, even if it is 60, 70%, that is good enough. Okay. What will happen is that when you are seeing a difference between what you're offering and what consumers are telling you, you should be able to pivot. You should be able to modify. A lot of companies find that difficult. A lot of startups find that difficult. Okay. And that is where the whole thing crashes. It is never a big issue of money. Never a big issue of money. Okay. Now, some startups, before they go earn revenue, don't need too much of money because the kind of work they have to do doesn't require too much of money. The time that they need to develop their proposition to a stage where they take it to the market may not be very long. So in these cases, small sum of money that they may garner up themselves, also their friends and family, may be sufficient, or they may get some investment from somebody that may be sufficient. But there are times when you get into high technology area, let's say aeronautics or some other chemical business, where the amount of investment to develop your solution could be very high. There it becomes a challenge where there you have to be able to meet investors who can buy into your idea, your venture, even though you do not have a success to show to them as a commercial success. Okay. And then what happens is that in these cases, even the investor would not put all the money one shot. They will also stagger the investment, because they want to see, okay, if you are here today, are you making enough progress in a certain period of time? If you make that progress, then they will start to put in more money. So milestone based investment will happen. It really depends. There's no one, if I were to say, approach to investment. But one of the things that all startups should look at is that the longer they can sustain themselves on their own, the better it is. But that should not be at the cost of moving into the market quickly enough. Now, there are also cases where startups, when they're into the market, then they take up funds very quickly, because then scale up should be faster. Well, now you're already in the market. The scale up should never be slow. If you can speed up your scale up by getting more funding, you should do that. But to come to the market, if you can avoid taking money, many of the startups actually prefer that. Now the question would be, why should that be the case? The case is, why that is the case, is that because till the time you take money from an investor, okay, till the time you are pretty much taking your own calls. But the day you take funds from investor, you have one important stakeholder who you need to align from time to time, which is good and bad both. Good, because that person would make sure that you are not frittering away the resources. And one of the important resources that startup would waste is the time. Okay? But an investor, once he comes there, they are on a time, they have a timelines which they would like to be adhere to. So they will actually push the startup to achieve certain milestone well in time, and not to become lazy or get diverted or deviated. So that's a good thing. Other good thing, of course, is that they help you to succeed. They try to bring in inputs which would help you to succeed. That the wrong, or let's say the con of that, is that you have to make an effort to align them as well, which should anyway become the part of life, part of living as an entrepreneur. So I would say, get an investor when you need, because when you need the funds. Okay, if you can avoid getting an investor and generate funds on your own, do that. Aditya, over to you.
Right, sir. So I guess you answered many questions which a person has when he thinks about the finances of a startup. So we have a question in the chat box. We have two questions, like, yeah, two. So I'll take the first one, which is, India has one of the largest number of entrepreneurs. Still, why do we lag behind in the ease of business? And the second part is, how does one survive in this hyper competitive environment?
Okay, so very good question, Keshav. Yes, India is actually ranks third in the startup ecosystem. The first one being US, second being China. But the scale difference is very large. So the difference between second and third, between China and us, is a large one, and the difference between third and fourth, between us and UK, is very small. So to just give you an example, I think it's a scale of about 1:7 for us, 7:1 for 7, or 8:1 for us. So while US and China are close to each other as 1 and 2, we are about 1/5, 1/6 of what US and China are as an ecosystem of entrepreneurs. Okay, so there's a big gap. So while we are number 3, we are still very far away from number 1 and 2. Number 4 and 5 are close to us. Now that basically tells you that while we have a large number of entrepreneurs, it is still a long way for us to go and catch up with 1 and 2. Now, having a large number of entrepreneurs and the ease of doing business, there is some correlation, but not a whole lot of it. Okay, the ease of doing business is more measured from the perspective of a large organization. That's how it is. If you look at the factors, they're more about bureaucratic approvals, etc. Startups by its nature are are anyway very, very, if I were to call, innovative and jugadu. For them, these are not the roadblocks which hold them back. They have to find a way around it or work along with these restrictions. Okay, so if one were to say, would the ease of business, if that was to become higher, if it were to become easier for people to work to start a business in India, will that help the startup? It would. It would generally help it. But startups are going up more not because of ease of business, but more because the acceptability of getting into startup from a various perspective. One, from a policy framework perspective, which is where the ease of business comes into play. If you look at it over the last few years, government has been promoting policies or forming policies which would encourage small businesses and startups. Number two, the risk financing at the earliest stage through various grants and schemes. Those are also being put into place. So now startups can get seed funding, some funding which would allow them for pre-revenue expenditure, innovation development expenditures. So those schemes have come up. Okay, the infrastructure in form of incubators has started to come up across the country. So incubators, mentors, they provide an area where a startup can get inputs, startup can get an environment where their chances of success are higher. Okay. The third thing, which is very interesting, is that large companies are now seeing a value of startup. They no longer see a startup as somebody they have to crush. See, the earlier thought was, don't let a competition come up and crush it. Now they've realized that you can't crush a great idea whose time has come. If you crush one startup, another will still come up, and the third and fourth and fifth, and you can't keep crushing. So they've realized that you have to collaborate with them. So find the ones who will succeed. Okay. So even if the ease of business doesn't improve, the corporates want the startups to grow because corporates have realized, large companies, that it's not easy for them to behave like a startup. So they would rather collaborate with some startup, invest with them, and as some of them become success, they would want to have an equity stake which allows them to benefit from the work that the startup has done. Okay, so what is happening is that it's not just the ease of doing business, which is seen as, let's say, from a government policy perspective, but even otherwise, the industry infrastructure is now encouraging startups. That is one. Second, social. Yes, still many parents would like their children to pick up a more regular job, more safer, more secure. But then they've also seen that the parents are saying, okay, why don't you try for some time? No, we can support you for some time, make a go. So I think socially it is more acceptable. Socially, making money and becoming rich is more acceptable. People don't look down upon it. And I think thirdly, very importantly, the younger generation has a different view of ethics. They no longer need to be told that they need to be ethical because they're seeing not just ethics part of the business, but they're also seeing a social good and environmental part of the business, which is also a very good thing. And then there is this financial inputs which are available. So I would say today the ecosystem is good, is very supportive of the startup, and as I see going forward, it will only increase. The ease of doing business is not a measure which should bother a startup. Ease of doing business is a measure which bothers a larger organizations. And it talks about things like, how long does it take for a industry to get an approval? How long does it take to get an approval to set up a plant? How long does it take an approval to get finance from abroad or make investments by a foreign company? Those are not something the startup would really be worried about. Okay, so now coming to the second question that Keshav had asked, how does one survive in this hyper-competitive environment? Now, that is what a startup does. Be innovative. Innovation is the key area. Now, why innovation? Because if you'll notice today, I mean, there used to be, when I started working, which was about 33 years ago, almost more than 3 decades ago. either, I mean, what was happening was that either you had something which allowed you to create a monopoly, and therefore you could do whatever you want. Okay, and then after 90s that you realize that you have to be competitive, which meant that you have to do things differently. So either you would do things which are like you do something which is standardized and you make it to a level, make it in a way that you are very, very efficient and you have a margin which is greater than that of your competition. So you will succeed because you can then bring your price down to a level where competition finds it difficult to operate with and not be able to compete when you do any marketing activity. That is one way of doing it. Other is to say customize to a level where you can make a lot of money because you price it higher. But today's world is actually combining both of them. People want customization and yet they want the pricing which is closer to a standardization. Now this is a game which a startup can play very well. Okay, they can be a customized and they can be a standardized. Pricing of a standardized business model and a customization of an individual and give that kind of a thing. Now that is where you can become very strong force. So to manage any competition, you need to build a sustainable advantage against it. And that sustainable advantage today is not very long time sustainable, so you got to constantly innovate. Okay, you got to constantly innovate. And if you look at it, all the successful ventures have been innovating. Amazon has been innovating so frequently. Flipkart has been innovating so frequently. Make My Trip has been innovating so frequently. Book My Show has been innovating. So all these are startups which have been innovating. And if you look at even established business like Levers, P&Gs, or industrial houses like Birlas or Tatas or Reliance, they've also been innovating. And innovation is not just in the product. Innovation has to be in their entire business. Okay, so if today you look at mobility, what has Ola done? Ola started with giving you mobility and it's going the other way around. It's going to now start manufacturing vehicles. Don't be surprised that some of the vehicle manufacturers like Tata's or Hero or Honda's could go the way Ola has gone. So they could actually be providing mobility services, not making vehicles. So this is something which is going to happen, that if you have to be competitive, you have to be innovative today. Or you be at such a large scale that you can produce things which are costing so low. But that's not going to work because people will still say, because it is low price, you cannot tell me that I can't get it customized. I still want to have a customization at a price of a standardized product. I hope that answers your question, Keshav.
Thank you, sir, for that amazing insight. So the next question is by participant Yash Mishra. He has asked the question that what all grades do government provides for a startup at the idea stage?
I think Yash, good question, and I think instead of grade, I think you wanted to say grants. I think what grants do government provide? Now, actually, government is trying to encourage two levels. One is MSMEs, small, micro and small enterprises, and they're also encouraging startups. Now, there are various schemes that the government is operating. None of these is being done directly by the government. What they're doing is they're doing it through various ministries. I'll tell you which are the few ministries which are actively and have a large sum of money and they're actively giving it to the startups. First is the Department of Science and Technology, which is there, it's an industry body, a government body which is doing that. Then there is Ministry of Engineering, Electronics and IT Technology, METI. Then there is Ministry of Medium and Small Enterprise, MSME. Okay, so these are three of them, and then there is BIRAC, which is for biotechnology. So these are some of the bodies. But if somebody wants to know what are the various schemes, a complete list of them, then you can go to Startup India website. Startup India website has a list of close to over 100 plus schemes under which a startup or a small medium enterprises, micro or small enterprises can apply for the scheme. Now, some of these schemes are open through the year, and the startup can apply for it directly. Some of these schemes are given against a call, so you have to apply when a call is open, and you have to compete and be accepted for that scheme. Some of these schemes have to be routed, can be had, but have to be routed through incubators. So there are various kind of schemes available, and the quantum can go from few lakhs, 4-5 lakhs, to going up to 20-25 lakhs as well. So many of these, the great thing about these government grants is that many of these grants are given without any obligation of return or of showing a success. Okay, but of course, here the intent of government is that they want to support you with this belief that you want to succeed on your own, and that they don't need to get the money back. Some of these schemes, but a smaller version, required to be paid back or required to give a certain equity to the government, not to the government, but to the incubator, through whom the schemes are coming in. With that, and the intent of that is because that once you return whatever has come your way, that return would allow further future startups to get that benefit. So that becomes more of a perpetual thing. The right place to look for the schemes would be to go to Startup India website, and under there is schemes and grants section, and you guys can access them. Or you can go to the websites of DST, MEETI, MSME, BIRAC. BIRAC is part of DBT, Department of Biotechnology. So these are some of the places. And also in many of the states, the state governments also have initiatives and grants to support startups. So like in state of Gujarat, the Gujarat government is very active in supporting startups. So similarly, wherever you are, you could look into that state government's policies, and can tap into those policies and the grants that they have. Okay, Hardik, any more questions?
Right. Sir, so one question which has recently been in a discussion is the concept of IPO. So we all know recently Zomato listed the IPO of in the stock market. So can you explain how does the concept of IPO basically work, and when does a startup have a IPO of the startup itself?
Okay, so IPO is, what is IPO? IPO is initial public offering. It basically means that a company or a business goes to stock exchange and invites the public at large to subscribe to its equity, to buy into its equity. Okay. Now there are big advantages of this, because when you require a lot of money, and IPO is nothing but it's actually a crowdsourcing. Nothing but a crowdsourcing, but crowdsourcing in a certain regulatory framework, which is regulated by a stock exchange watchdog and stock exchange that you go to. So like in case of India, it is regulated by SEBI. And if you go list yourself, so you have to meet a certain set of requirements. Why that is there is because if you think from a public perspective, you and I, what is it? We'll buy 50 shares, 100 shares, we might invest few lakhs. But we do not get involved in the operations of the business. We are very distant from the operations of the business. We really don't know, is the money being used judiciously or not? Are they doing right thing? They're not siphoning off the money. Because at the end of the day, we are the shareholders. A large number of us are the shareholders. But at individual capacity, we don't have the time and the ability to understand this and take a decision on their behalf. So shareholders' interest, like you and I, small shareholders, large number of us, is taken care of by regulators. It is SEBI, it is the Ministry of Corporate Affairs also, which is involved. So all of them create a certain regulatory framework, which is to make sure that the shareholders' money interests are protected by the managers, okay, of the organization. So when a startup is going to take funds from IPO, at that point in time, first of all, it has to meet the regulatory requirement to show that you as an organization are meeting certain requirements of financial discipline, of certain amount of stability, etc., which would mean that if somebody were to invest, it would be a running concern. It won't kind of disappear by the night. So you have to meet a lot of requirements. But if you meet that, if you meet those regulatory framework, the access to funds can be very high. But just because you go, people are not going to invest in you. You have to market yourself. You have to convince the investor that they would have healthy returns by investing the money in their business. Okay, with taking an ownership. So you have to do that as well. Now this only happens when you reach a certain scale. You can't do it once you are a few crores of turnover. And so therefore, although of course now the SEBI is actually contemplating to let small startups also come and seek funds from an IPO. But what it also comes with a very large time and effort to be invested and cost to be invested to meet the regulatory requirement, not just of going into an IPO, but thereafter as well. Because IPO is the start, but every time, but regular or let's say ongoing restrictions are there, or ongoing obligations have also got to be met. Regular share of transfer of information, approvals, all of them are required. It costs money, it costs certain effort to do it. So those are also coming with it. IPO in itself is also required because the initial investors get an opportunity to exit. So whether it is an individual angel investor or a set of VCs who have been investing, even co-founders get an opportunity to encash their investment. So that is what. See, the VCs and angel investors don't make money by dividends or by dividends coming from profit. Many times the profit is also not there, so there is no profit. There can't be dividends also. So they make their money, they make their returns by exiting through an IPO. So that is why a startup can actually be made to go for an IPO simply because the earlier investors want to exit. Okay, and there are no future investors of the same level wanting to do it, or a PE funds wanting to. So these are the thing that a startup has to keep in mind when they're talking of an IPO.
Right, sir. Sir, so if time permits for you, I would like to take one last question.
Sure, please.
Yeah. So my question is regarding the investors. So we all have heard the terms like seed capital, angel investor funding, venture capital funding, um, e-bridge loans, and many more. So can you explain what do these terms really mean,
Right.
and how do they matter for a startup?
Right. So let's start with the thing. You decide to have a venture, have a startup. So few of you get together, pool in your money. You get friends and family to give some money, and you start to work with that. And you then reach a certain time and then certain stage of your venture, and you need more funds. And the family and friends cannot give that kind of funds, and you're still not been gone to revenue. So that point of time, you might seek into these government grants or schemes, and that will take you to next level. Okay, where maybe you have got your idea tested, you have a prototype ready, and you could show that that there is a fair chance of success. At that point in time, you may seek seed funding, or you might go to an angel investor and say, give me funds, which basically means that idea is getting germinated, idea is still in a stage, and it still got to come out into the market and start to make money for itself. So that's the time when you might get people who are angel investors who put their personal money with the belief that you and your idea will succeed in future. And of course, they have their own way of judging that. Different people have different ways of judging that. And so that is where these angel investors come into being. Typically, they're called angels simply because they are like the heavenly bodies who have more faith in you than others would, a common man would have in you. So they are like an angel. Okay, so they give you the money and they would work with you to succeed. Of late, group of angels get together. Okay, group of angel investors get together and they create a network like Mumbai Angels or Delhi Angels. Okay. Now, why they do that is simply because what it does is that if they have to invest, let's say, 1 crore into one business, which is what is required, then the number of businesses that they can invest goes down. They also know that all of these businesses that they invest in will not succeed. So they will want to have a much larger base of businesses to invest in. But money being limited, what they do is if they get together, the pool becomes bigger. And hence they can invest a smaller amount, 5 lakhs, 10 lakhs, 20 lakhs, in a greater number of businesses. That is where they are able to what is called a diversify their investment and have a better return of that. The other bit is they realize that every time they invest, a certain cost goes in terms of assessment and the paperwork and the due diligence. Now, if they do it individually, the cost gets multiplied. If 5 of them were to do individually, each one of them will spend an X amount and 5X will be spent. But if they come together and they do it, then this 5X remains only 1X. And hence for each one of them, it becomes 0.2X. Okay? So it becomes far more efficient and far more productive to work as a group. So therefore, you have now got this angel investor networks. But angel investor network is coming closer to another entity called venture capitalists. What venture capitalists does is they also invest money, but they invest not their own money, but they take money from other investors. They pool that amount together and then they act as managers of that amount to be invested in startups. Okay, and they charge a certain fee for it. And they're also mandated to give a good return back to the investors who have given this money to begin with. And because they are now investing a larger sum of money and they have a time frame within which they have to invest, they would not go and invest generally in an early stage, because early stage would require a lot of time before the returns can come from them. Okay, so they will typically start with those who are in the market, have some traction to go with. And 2, they would not, whether they invest 5 crores or they invest 25 crores in a business, it doesn't really reduce the time and effort to manage that 5 crore versus 25 crores. So what they would like to do is they would try to invest a higher amounts in rather than a very small amount, because then the number of investment, they don't want too many investments to manage. They also diversify, but they don't want over diversification, because then the cost of managing those investments goes very high. So VCs typically would invest larger amounts, but in a certain number of companies. And therefore, when a startup reaches an early revenue stage or an early growth stage, that is when the VC funds would typically make sense. Before that, you would look at either individual investors, angel investors, or a angel investor network. Also, what happens is that now, of late, venture debt has also become available. So while the banks and NBFCs still would not invest in a startup easily, but now what has happened is that after, let's say, a startup gets a Series A funding from a venture capitalist, which shows that there is a certain amount of conviction in the business model in that startup, and they are also on a growth stage, then investors are willing to give money on debt. Now, why that works is because every time you take money from a VC, a founder has to liquidate. Earlier investors have to dilute their holding. And sometimes they don't want to dilute the holding, but they still want the funds, but they are in a position to service that debt with their cash flows. And they're willing to pay a higher rate of interest versus the bank. Okay. So because of that, now the venture debt has also come into being. So there are certain consortiums where somebody who would have given some money as an equity to be invested as an equity through VC also gives some funds to these guys and say, now invest it as a debt. So it will give me maybe 9%, maybe 10%, not the 6 or 7% which usually we will get from bank. So those venture debt has now become available. Now the venture debt acts in a way like a bridge funding. So if let's say a business requires certain amount of funds for a working capital, okay, so they can take it as a venture debt, use that to run the scale of the business, okay. And what happens is that does not lead to dilution of the equity of the investors, but it scales up the business, and that business could then, after being scaled up, can go in for an IPO. So this is becoming what is known as a mezzanine or a bridge funding. It doesn't really doesn't lead to equity dilution. Okay, so this is also something which you're doing. And now, as I had spoken, a lot of corporates are also doing this venture capital business. So what the corporate does is they will set aside a certain fund which they will invest in startups in which areas they have an interest. So like electric mobility is an area of interest for established automobile companies. So they will start to invest in some of these electric mobility startups. You know, somebody who's working on, let's say, technology for battery. Somebody who is working on technology related to charging. Okay, or some startup which is looking at setting up charging stations. Some startup is looking at how to combine IoT and mobility. So they will start investing in them. Okay, so these are corporate venture funds. They're not the typical venture capital fund. They are a corporate venture funds. So those are also becoming available. And of course, finally, once you are successful, then you say, okay, because these they all are seeking a certain exit. The corporate typically would not look for an exit. Corporate is making that investment to acquire that business. Okay, but other than that, IPO will be a very good final exit, which most of these guys will take. They will encash themselves and then give the returns back to their investors. I hope I've been able to kind of quickly cover, but of course there's a lot of information available on net to read. It is not something which is rocket science. Any one of you can read it, or talk to any startup who has gone through it, or any funder, investor who is available to you. You can talk to them, and they can give you a lot more information in this area.
Right, sir. Right. Sir, so I'm done with my questions, and if the audience has any last questions to ask, you can go ahead.
Anyone wants to have any further discussion, Hardika has my contact details. You can connect with me through them. How many of you are planning to have your own startup? I mean, I know Yash is already thinking or working on it. How many of you? You can just raise hand in your, yeah. Okay. Are you guys incubated anywhere? All right. I think if you want, we would be happy to have a conversation with you. We have a virtual incubation program at our university under the Atal Community Innovation Center as well as Propel. And if you would be interested, Hardika, if you can share my email with them. I'm just putting my contact details in the form in this, so you can connect with me. We would be happy to see if we can help you out. And those of you in your ventures and you would like to be incubated, so we are open to doing that through our virtual program. All right, thank you so much, everybody. Please enjoy the Saturday evening, afternoon, and a great weekend, and wish you all the best. And I think we still need to keep ourselves and our family, then friends, safe. So keep practicing the various measures, mask, hand wash, social distance. Please keep doing that. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be here with you all.
Thank you so much, sir.
Welcome.
Thank you.